The boardroom buzzed with conversation as I glanced down at my phone, its screen lighting up with an incoming call from Marcus. I excused myself and stepped into the corridor, expecting the usual check-in. How's the summit? When are you flying back? Instead, his voice came through, cold and almost smug. I'm divorcing you, Marcus said, his tone laced with something that sounded disturbingly like satisfaction. Also, I've sold the condo, so you'll need to figure out where you're going to live. Enjoy that. For a moment, the hallway seemed to blur around me. The audacity. The sheer nerve. My grip tightened around the phone as I forced myself to stay calm. You sold the condo? I asked evenly, trying to keep my voice from shaking. Yeah, he said, chuckling. Claire and I need the money to start fresh. She deserves more than that shoebox you were so obsessed with anyway. Claire. The name hit like a slap. I'd suspected for months that someone else was involved, his frequent work dinners, his sudden overnight trips, the way he barely looked at me anymore. But to hear him say her name like I was the outsider in their love story? It lit something in me. Sounds great, I replied coolly. Wishing you both the very best. My name is Naomi, and up until that phone call, I thought I was married to a man I could trust. Marcus and I had been together for 8 years. I'm 41. We'd worked side by side to build a life together, or so I believed. We bought our downtown Chicago condo 5 years ago. It was a warm, art-filled space with exposed brick walls, a balcony overlooking the skyline, and more memories than I could count. It wasn't just property. It was ours. But now, it felt like everything had been built on sand. Looking back, the warning signs were all there. Marcus's dismissiveness whenever I asked about joint expenses. The way he'd wave off my questions with a smile, a kiss, and a, don't worry, babe, I've got it. I'd taken his confidence as reassurance. But now I knew, it was arrogance. Arrogance that came from believing I'd never look too closely. That I'd never catch on. The rest of the day passed in a daze. I nodded through conference panels and luncheons, but inside, I was unraveling and rebuilding all at once. Marcus thought he'd won. That he could blindside me, walk off with someone else, and leave me scrambling. What he didn't know, what he never bothered to pay attention to, was that the condo was in my name. Solely. We'd refinanced back in January, and at the time, it made sense for everything to be under my name due to credit and interest rate benefits. Marcus had barely skimmed the paperwork before signing it. He never even asked questions. Typical. And that carelessness? It was going to cost him everything. By the time I got back to my hotel room that evening, my shock had solidified into clarity. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. If Marcus wanted a war, he was about to find out just how prepared I was for one. The first call I made was to Cassandra, my lawyer and longtime friend. I laid out everything, every detail, every lie, every move Marcus had made. Cass didn't miss a beat. We've got this, she said, her voice steady. And we're not just going to protect what's yours, we're going to make sure he regrets underestimating you. And just like that, the game had changed. Marcus may have made the first move, but I was going to make the last one. And it would be checkmate. My voice was calm, even though my heart pounded like a drumline. He sold the condo? Cassandra repeated, incredulous. Does he even realize he can't do that without your consent? Apparently not, I replied, a flicker of amusement in my voice. He thinks he's already spent the money on his shiny new life with Claire. Cass let out a dry laugh. Well, he's in for a rude awakening. The sale's invalid. You can prove sole ownership, and if he's accepted money from the buyer, he's flirting with fraud charges. The word fraud sent a quiet, satisfying jolt through me. After all the betrayal, the gaslighting, the smug arrogance, there was something poetic about that. So, what do we do now? I asked. First, we notify the buyer that the sale's not legal, she said, her tone shifting into full battle mode. Then, I'll draft a formal letter to Marcus outlining what he's done and the legal consequences. If he tries anything else, we go to court. And trust me, Naomi, he'll lose. When I hung up, a strange stillness came over me. Not numbness, clarity. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had control again. Marcus had been so sure he'd won. So confident in his illusion of power. But he didn't realize he'd just stepped directly into a trap of his own making. I spent the rest of the leadership summit with renewed focus. I compartmentalized my emotions and poured everything into my work, not to distract myself, but to remember who I am, a woman who's built her own success, brick by brick. The betrayal still stung, but the thought of reclaiming my life, and watching Marcus's smug confidence unravel, gave me purpose. By the time I boarded my flight back to Chicago, I was ready. Ready for whatever came next. Ready to stare him in the eye and let him know, you don't get to erase me. The hours in the air gave me plenty of time to think about everything he'd done. The way he flaunted Claire like I was disposable. The way he assumed I'd roll over while he dismantled the life I helped build. But instead of spiraling, I stayed grounded. Because while Marcus thought he'd trapped me, he never realized that the game had already shifted. When the wheels touched down at O'Hare, I pulled out my phone and called Cassandra as I waited for my suitcase. "I'm back," I said, dragging my luggage off the carousel. "Perfect timing," she replied briskly. "We've already contacted the buyer." They were surprised, to say the least, and not thrilled with Marcus. But they're cooperating. That'll make our case cleaner. "And Marcus?" "I emailed the letter this morning," she said. "It outlines your sole ownership, the illegality of the sale, and the fact that if he took any money, he could be liable for fraud." No response yet, but if I had to guess, he's stewing. "Good," I muttered. "Let him stew." When I stepped into the condo, it was quiet, but not in the comforting way it used to be. His coat was still slung over the chair. His shoes, carelessly tossed by the door. It looked the same. But it didn't feel the same. Something had shifted. I dropped my suitcase and exhaled slowly. I knew the storm was coming. And right on cue, Marcus burst through the door a few hours later. His face flushed, eyes wild, and his phone clutched like a weapon. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, waving the printed letter in the air like a flag of outrage. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I just met his eyes and said, "It's called the law. You should try respecting it sometime." "You're telling me I can't sell the condo?" Marcus snapped, his voice sharp with disbelief. "It's half mine." "No, Marcus," I said, calmly folding my arms. "It's not. The deed's been in my name for months. You can't sell something you don't own." He froze mid-step, his expression caught between confusion and outrage. "What the hell are you talking about?" Without a word, I walked over to the folder I'd pulled from the hallway cabinet earlier and retrieved the document. I held it up, steady and deliberate. "After we refinanced in January," I said, "I had the deed transferred into my name. You signed off on it, remember? Or were you too busy skimming the paperwork like always?" For a moment, he just stared. Then his face twisted into a sneer. "You think you're so clever, don't you? You think this changes anything? I already made a deal. You're going to look like a fool when this all collapses." I didn't blink. "The sale is already void," I said, voice cool. "The buyer knows it. They're furious and prepared to take legal action if you don't return the deposit." I stepped forward, lowering my voice. "Oh, and speaking of the deposit, if you've spent even a cent of that money, Marcus, you've got more than a legal mess on your hands. You've got fraud." That shook him. His bravado slipped for the first time. "You don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, eyes darting away from mine. "I know exactly what I'm talking about," I replied. "You've spent years treating me like I'm too naive to see through you. But guess what, Marcus, I've been watching. I've learned. And now? Now you get to live with the consequences. He began pacing, his frustration boiling over. This is insane. You're blowing everything out of proportion. You can't just kick me out. I raised an eyebrow. Actually, I can. The condo is legally mine. You can stay for now, but only because I'm giving you the courtesy of time to figure out where you're going to go. But make no mistake, I'm not the one leaving. Over the next few days, Marcus's bravado cracked into desperation. He called me constantly, leaving a flurry of voicemails that swung wildly between pleading and threatening. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Cassandra worked behind the scenes, tying up every loose end. The buyer rescinded the agreement, furious at Marcus for wasting their time. Cassandra was already drafting the preliminary divorce paperwork. You're in a strong position, Naomi, she told me during one of our meetings. He has no leverage. Between the voided sale and the potential fraud charges, he's going to have to cooperate unless he wants this to blow up in his face even more. Her words were a relief, but also sobering. For years, I'd let Marcus get away with his smugness, his control, his subtle undermining. I'd convinced myself it wasn't worth the fight. I'd bent, accommodated, adapted. But not anymore. I saw clearly now what I'd been giving up. And I was done giving. One evening, my best friend Laura came over to help me reorganize the space. We boxed up Marcus's things, his jackets, his books, his ridiculous espresso machine, and stacked the boxes neatly in the corner of the living room. No drama. No ceremony. Just business. How's it feel? Laura asked gently as we folded the last shirt. I looked around, the room already starting to feel like mine again, lighter, warmer. Honestly? I said, smiling for the first time in what felt like ages. Like the start of something real. Something mine. And it was. He's taking all this? Laura asked, holding up one of Marcus's gaudy silk ties with a smirk. Not well, I said, laughing despite myself. He's still convinced he can talk his way out of this like it's just a misunderstanding. But I'm not budging. Good, she said, tossing the tie into the box with a satisfying thud. He doesn't deserve a single inch of your space, or your time. I nodded, a wave of gratitude washing over me. For so long, I'd felt completely alone in my marriage, carrying the emotional load, the financial stress, and still managing to keep things together while Marcus basked in the credit. But now, I had people beside me. Real support. And that changed everything. The final piece of the puzzle snapped into place the day Marcus brought Claire to the condo. I was sitting at the dining table, highlighting notes on a contract, when the door opened. And in they walked, like they owned the place. Claire's heels clicked against the hardwood floors as she looked around, her lips curling into a smug smile. Her arm was looped through Marcus's like a trophy. So this is where we're staying, she said, her voice dripping with entitlement. I stood slowly, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. No, I said. This is where Marcus was staying. You, Claire, won't be staying here at all. Her smile faltered, and she looked to Marcus for an explanation. He looked equally stunned, blinking like someone had just splashed ice water in his face. What is this? He demanded. This? I said, motioning around the condo. This is my home. Not yours. Not hers. And absolutely not a hotel for the two of you to crash in after stabbing me in the back. Claire's eyes narrowed, but she stayed silent. Marcus, however, turned bright red. You can't do this, he shouted. You're being unreasonable. I didn't flinch. No, Marcus. What's unreasonable is thinking you could sell my home, keep the money, and expect me to disappear quietly. You're lucky I haven't filed criminal charges yet. He stood in the entryway, fists clenched, trying to muster some version of control. Claire shifted uncomfortably beside him, clearly not enjoying this version of events. You're being ridiculous, Naomi, he said, voice cracking with frustration. You can't just kick me out of my own home. I took a step forward, my tone still calm. This isn't your home. The deed's in my name, and has been for months. You signed the paperwork, remember? Or did you skim that one too? Claire turned sharply toward him. Wait. What's she talking about? She asked, her tone cold and suspicious. You said this was your apartment. That you sold it. Marcus hesitated, eyes darting between us. It's complicated. I'll handle it. Oh, it's not complicated, I cut in. It's actually very simple. Marcus tried to sell a property he doesn't own. The sale is void. And as of right now, he's out of options. Claire's face twisted with realization. Wait, the money. The money you told me you had, her voice rose, eyes narrowing. Oh my God. Did you lie about that too? Claire, let me explain, Marcus started, lifting his hands in defense. But she stepped away from him. No, she snapped. I'll explain. She turned to me, anger replacing the smugness. He told me this was all his. That he'd sold it already and we'd be starting over with the money. I shrugged. Well, he lied. And now he has to live with it. Marcus opened his mouth, but there was nothing left to say. The truth was out. The mask had shattered. And this time, I wasn't the one who had to pick up the pieces. In my name months ago, I said, my tone calm but firm. So not only did Marcus fail to sell the condo, but he also committed fraud by pretending he could. Claire's mouth opened and closed, her face twisting with confusion and disbelief, like a fish gasping for air. Fraud? She whispered, taking a step back from him. Are you serious? Yes. Fraud, I repeated, folding my arms. And if he's not out of here with his things by the end of the day, I'm fully prepared to press charges. Marcus's facade finally crumbled. The cocky grin, the puffed-up confidence, it all dropped away like a mask slipping. Naomi, you can't do this, he said, voice suddenly desperate, as if we hadn't just spent the last few weeks on opposite sides of a war. We've been together for 8 years. You can't just throw me out. I blinked slowly, letting his words settle in the space between us before answering. You threw me out, I said, my voice like steel. The moment you made that phone call, laughing while you told me you were divorcing me and that I had to find a new place to live. You didn't just betray me, Marcus. You tried to ruin me. So don't you dare stand there and act like you're the victim. Claire took another step back, her eyes flitting between the two of us, panic starting to rise behind her mascara. This is insane, she muttered, clutching her designer purse tighter. You didn't tell me any of this, Marcus. You said it was handled. You said you owned this place. Claire, I can fix this, Marcus said, turning toward her, his voice cracking. I just need a little time, Don't, she cut him off sharply, raising one hand. Just, don't. I'm not getting dragged into your mess. Without another word, she turned on her heel and walked out, her heels echoing against the hardwood. The door clicked shut behind her with the finality of a judge's gavel. I turned back to Marcus, watching as the reality of his isolation began to settle on his shoulders. Looks like you're on your own, I said quietly. Now, let's talk about what happens next. He slumped down onto the couch like he was made of sand, burying his face in his hands. Naomi, please, he mumbled. I screwed up. I know that. But you don't have to do this. You're right, I said, walking into the kitchen and returning with a folder. I set it down on the coffee table in front of him. I don't have to. But I am. He looked up, his eyes hollow. That's the divorce paperwork, I said. Cassandra already drafted everything. I suggest you sign it quickly. The sooner you do, the sooner we can both move on. He stared at the folder, like it might bite him. You really hate me that much? Hate you? I let out a cold, quiet laugh. No, Marcus. I don't hate you. I pity you. You had everything, a woman who loved you, a home we built together, a future, and you threw it all away because you couldn't see past your own ego. I stood tall, my heart thudding but my voice steady. I want you out of here by the end of the day. Pack your things. Figure out where you're going. This is the last time I extend you any grace. He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. His shoulders slumped in defeat. Fine, he muttered. I'll go. Good, I said, walking toward the door. And don't even think about pulling anything. Cassandra's already handling everything. Cross the line again, and the courts will handle it next. I held the door open. Marcus slowly stood, pulled on his coat, and walked out without meeting my eyes. His footsteps were heavy, slow, full of regret. For a moment, a flicker of sadness touched me, not for him, but for the life I thought we were building. For the version of Marcus that had never truly existed. But that moment passed. I closed the door, turned the new deadbolt I had installed, and stood in the silence that followed. Relief washed over me. I was finally free. I had made this life. This was my home now, and no one, especially not Marcus, was ever going to take it from me again. The silence in the condo after he left was startling. For the first time in years, I could actually breathe. No more tension lingering in the corners, no more quiet resentment in every shared object. The space finally felt like mine again, free from Marcus's presence, his entitlement, his manipulations. It was just me, standing in the home I had fought for, and the slow, powerful realization that I had won. Not just against him, but against every self-doubt, every time I'd told myself to stay quiet, to keep the peace. I hadn't just survived the storm. I'd stepped into the calm on the other side stronger than ever. I stood in the middle of the living room, taking in the clean lines where his clutter had been. The oversized gaming chair he loved more than conversations with me, gone. The framed jerseys that had once taken up an entire wall, gone. That hideous, chrome-legged coffee table he insisted we keep, even though it clashed with everything, finally gone. The apartment looked brighter. Lighter. Like it had been holding its breath all this time, waiting for me to come back to it. That evening, Laura came over with Thai takeout and a bottle of wine. She kicked off her shoes, collapsed onto the couch, and looked around with wide eyes. Is he really gone? She asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and relief. Gone and not coming back, I said, handing her a glass of wine. I gave him until the end of the day to pack up, and to my surprise, he didn't argue. She raised her glass. To fresh starts and well-deserved victories. I clinked my glass against hers, a smile tugging at the corners of my lips. To never letting anyone walk all over me again. The next few days were filled with quiet transformation. I rearranged the living room, moved my favorite artwork into the front space, added books, candles, plants, things that made me smile just by being there. It wasn't just redecorating. It was reclaiming. Redefining the space. Making it a reflection of me, not the woman Marcus had tried to mold, quiet and accommodating, but the woman I'd always been underneath. Cassandra called midweek with updates on the legal proceedings. Her voice, always brisk and sure, filled me with a sense of safety. The fraud charges are off the table, she said. The buyer doesn't want to pursue it. But the divorce paperwork is moving right along. Once Marcus signs, you'll be officially free. That word, free, hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just about the divorce. It was about all of it. The years of shrinking to fit someone else's life. The emotional labor. The exhaustion of feeling invisible. I was finally setting it all down. Marcus tried to reach out a few times. I saw his name light up my phone, his messages swinging wildly between guilt and desperation. One said, I made a mistake. Can we at least talk? Another read, you're going to ruin me, Naomi. Is that what you want? I never replied. Because for once, I wasn't going to play the part of the fixer. I wasn't going to absorb his consequences, or hold space for the man who had never truly held space for me. By the end of the week, the condo felt brand new. It was warm. Peaceful. Entirely mine. I sat on the couch, legs tucked under me, sipping a cup of tea as the Chicago skyline shimmered beyond the windows. The city pulsed with a quiet rhythm, alive with new beginnings. Marcus's betrayal had shaken me, but it had also become the catalyst I didn't know I needed. And now? I was free. And I was just getting started. It had been a wake-up call, one I didn't even know I needed. For too long, I had let myself believe that I didn't deserve more. That I had to settle for whatever scraps of love and respect Marcus decided to toss my way, like favors I had to earn. But now? Now I knew better. I wasn't just reclaiming my condo. I was reclaiming myself. A month later, my life looked completely different. The space around me hadn't undergone some massive renovation, but it was completely transformed. Not because of what had changed physically, but because of how it felt. It was finally a reflection of me. Gone were the remnants of Marcus's clutter and his overpowering presence. The oppressive energy had lifted, and in its place was something lighter, freer. A home that echoed my tastes, my peace, and my independence. The divorce process had moved forward without issue. Cassandra handled everything with surgical precision, ensuring Marcus had no room to stall, argue, or manipulate the outcome. He signed the papers quietly, likely realizing he had no leverage left. No grand showdown. No final plea. Just a clean, unceremonious break. It was bittersweet in a way, but more than anything, it was satisfying. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of old documents in the hall closet, I found a photo tucked between folders. It was of Marcus and me, back in the early days. We were at Navy Pier, laughing, arms wrapped around each other, full of hope. For a moment, I let the memory wash over me. There had been good times. Real ones. I wouldn't deny that. But those moments had long since been eclipsed by years of silence, selfishness, and manipulation. I slipped the photo into an envelope and filed it away in a drawer. I wasn't ready to throw it out, but it didn't deserve a place on my walls either. It was part of my story, but it didn't define me anymore. A week later, Lauren and I celebrated the finalized divorce with dinner and cocktails at a rooftop bar in the West Loop. The skyline glittered behind her as she raised her drink toward me. "Your glow is glowing," she said, grinning. "Single life suits you." I laughed, surprised by how much lighter I felt. "It's not the single life," I said. "It's the freedom. For the first time in years, I don't feel like I'm living under someone else's expectations." We toasted to that. As the night stretched on, I felt a quiet pride rise in my chest. I'd survived one of the hardest chapters of my life, and I didn't just scrape by. I grew. I stood tall. I thrived. Back at home that night, I curled up on the couch with a cup of chamomile tea, the city glowing outside the window. My condo had become more than a refuge, it was a symbol of resilience. Still, I knew it wasn't my forever home. One day, I'd move to a new place. One without any shadows of Marcus. One that didn't hold echoes of the past. But until then, I was going to soak in every moment of peace I had fought for. As I rested there, I thought back to that phone call. The smug tone in Marcus's voice when he thought he'd won. When he thought he'd destroyed me. I smiled to myself. His arrogance had been his downfall. And my quiet, deliberate strength had been my salvation. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the start of a new chapter, one where I made the rules, chose the path, and defined happiness on my own terms. And after all this time, I could finally say it without hesitation. I was free. If my story resonated with you, even just a little, I want to ask you for something. Support women like me. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, or just let me know you see me. Because for a long time, I didn't feel seen. I felt small. Unimportant. Like my needs came second, third, or not at all. But I'm here now, standing in my truth, and if you've ever been where I was, shrinking to make someone else comfortable, I want you to know, you're not alone. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me what part hit you the hardest. Tell me if you've ever felt that same pit in your stomach when someone you loved twisted the knife. I want to hear your voice because our voices matter, especially when we've been told they don't. To those who followed my journey, thank you. Truly. Your support, your time, your belief in me, it means more than you know. And if you're sitting on the edge of your own decision, unsure whether to walk away, to start over, to choose you, let this be your sign. Choose you. Don't wait for someone else to validate your worth. You're already enough. My advice? Pay attention to the quiet. That still voice inside you. It knows. Don't ignore the red flags. Don't keep compromising your peace to protect someone else's ego. Love should never cost you your voice, your space, or your sanity. This wasn't just about a condo or a marriage. It was about reclaiming my life, and knowing that I deserve better. So do you. And when you take that first brave step, just know. I'll be cheering you on too. Drop a comment. Share your story. We're stronger together.